Hey Brad, how's it going?
Hey, Chris, I'm doing A-okay. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good. Hey man, what have you been thinking about lately?
Lately, I have had time on the mind with Advent starting just on Sunday. It's a lot about waiting, it's about history, it's about the end of time. And there's a lot of crazy ideas that I would love to talk about when it comes to the end of time, because it's a big part of Christianity. And I thought we could go down some weird rabbit holes with that.
That sounds like a good time. You want to talk about it?
I think I just might.
Freestyle Theology is sponsored by Daily Breath, the Christian meditation app that really works. Learn more at dailybreadth.app.
All right, well, if we're going to talk about time and Advent, I guess I'll just start and say and acknowledge or confess, like, how does it work? I've led Advent series at churches over the years, and there's a sense of like it's about the anticipating the first coming of Christ. Baby Jesus is going to be born on the first Christmas day, but it's also like an anticipation of the second coming that we're sitting in because we're after that first one, but we're longing in the past for Jesus's birth that's already happened, but for the future, something that hasn't happened. And it like, yeah, it feels like it's difficult to understand how time works in that or how to view that in terms of time.
Yeah, I've kind of felt that myself, where sometimes the whole like the liturgies about anticipating the birth of Christ feel really, I don't know, disconnected. Not, I mean, performative. I'm not trying to critique it because I get it and I like it, but it's hard to feel the anticipation that the Advent liturgies sort of convey when the thing has already happened and we've already done this,
Mm-hmm.
2000 times or whatever it is. So then it makes me think, is Advent more about the second coming of Christ, or is it more of a like historical exercise where we try to get into the mind of the the Israelites? Because I think that's another big key part of Advent, right? It's really about feeling, it's weird. Advent is this season of chaos, right? And like frenzy. And weirdly, both in the consumer culture and in sort of the ancient culture, where it's like actually feeling the tension of Rome and the political
Mm-hmm.
oppression and stuff like that. And yet, Advent is also this time of like peace and beauty. It's really strange, you
Mm-hmm.
know? So I think I like the season because of its sort of contradictions, where it's like, this is actually us tapping into a really difficult, painful era for the Israelites. And yet there's something about it that's like calming. I don't know. Do you know what I mean by that? Like, do you feel
Yeah.
that same thing?
Yeah, I love it because it necessarily puts us back in the story and it puts us in a part of the Bible story that we don't think about very often or that we know so little about. So I think we can say the Bible story, okay, creation, Adam and Eve. We can see the rebellion, Israel stuff, but it puts us in this Israel like kind of the Old Testament has ended and is promised that something's going to happen, and you have this long waiting period that we don't know much about. We don't think about it. We don't, and you have to be in that anticipation, in that longing space to really experience why it's so important that Jesus comes.
Right.
Like why he came. He didn't just come out of nowhere. He came as the culmination of this story. And these people that to understand what he's saying when you're listening to Jesus, like you have to understand how much they had been waiting and longing for something. But then you're right. And but then there's this, but we're not really waiting and longing because he already came. But
But
we
then
should
we,
be waiting and longing for his second coming, which is interesting.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
then to make it even more, let me just get this all convoluted and then you can sort this out. This is going to be a weird podcast. So then for the lectionary, the gospel reading last Sunday for the first Sunday of Advent was in Matthew, where Jesus says, "Hey, when you see the fig tree, when you see it starting to bloom, the leaves starting to come, the time is like summer is upon us. The time is imminent." And so he's like, in the same way, the Son of Man is like, be ready now. There's this like now is the time. But then we sing like the biggest popular crit is "Come thou long expected." Is it like he's long expected, or Jesus is saying it's now And it was when Jesus is there, but that's after his birth and it's in his ministry. And then it's like all the timing gets all convoluted for me.
Yeah, that's kind of my feelings too. But maybe we can understand or relate to the Israelite waiting period a little more than we think. Because I think we forget that for them, in the what we call like that messianic age, right? The beginning of or like kind of the 200 years around the first century, they had no idea that the Messiah would come. They were like kind of desperate for it in like a frenzied way at times, right? But I wonder if there's probably plenty of people who were like, this isn't going to happen. This is crazy. Like this, I bet there was some realists in there who are just like, this isn't a thing. Like we could be waiting forever. And then that makes me think that feels kind of like now, where some days you really long for Christ to return. Like that just sounds wonderful. And other times it sounds like, is that ever going to happen? Am I crazy? And one of my favorite parts of the Christian faith is its nuttiness. Like this is some crazy stuff we're talking about. And I like to remember that and remind myself of that sometimes, because we have sort of a goal of making Christianity respectable and, in the apologetic sphere, making it reasonable and rational. And, but at the end of the day, it's like, we're talking about people coming back from the dead. We actually are talking about that. We're talking about the whole universe being transformed and healed and raised up from its entropy, And I just find that for some reason that makes me excited to really lean into the crazy stuff. Because it's only crazy because it's so epic, I actually spend quite a bit of time thinking and talking about the end of time. And I think it's like stuff to really imagine. You can go down some rabbit holes and end up thinking some kooky stuff. And I do. I thought I could like talk about a couple of those things.
Go for it. Tell us about some of the I want to hear some of the end of time rabbit holes.
Okay, here's one that I think is really cool. Again, do I have any biblical basis for this? No, not really. I have, because scripture talks about that at the end, God will renew all things. But it doesn't really say what that means. We have a sense of what that might mean, right? But what does it actually look like in reality, outside of like theological language? I have this one idea that I can't remember what it was. You probably remember 1st or 2nd Corinthians, where Paul talks about the resurrected body. Is that 2nd Corinthians?
1 Corinthians 15.
And he talks about how he uses the image of a seed to describe the body, right? So it's like a seed. The body, this mortal body, is like a seed that's planted. And in that kind of ancient understanding, it dies in the soil and then it grows into something completely different, even though it's still the seed, right? But like, so in the same way that there's our body now and our resurrected body in the future, one is like a seed and one is like a tree, right? Made of the same sort of stuff, but completely different things at the same time, right? So I'm like, I have this idea that what if the earth itself, the planet, is a seed? And this is the crazy idea. And I have this sense.
Hey, the tagline for this podcast is wandering freely out loud. Wondering, not wandering, wondering. Okay, so you're wondering freely. You're free to wonder out loud.
I am wondering. And the earth is a seed, or even bigger than that. All the matter in the universe is a seed. And at the end of time, it's planted, it dies, and it is raised up again. What if all of space, empty space, is filled with matter, so that the universe itself, there is no space, emptiness in it anymore? It's all just one gigantic existence. So, you know what I mean? So
no,
it's like,
I have no idea what you mean. Keep going. I love it. Keep going.
It's basically
my
like,
mind is bending over here.
What if the space, the emptiness that is the majority of the universe, is replaced with land and water and mountain and everything you could imagine? It's that I have this sense that the resurrected cosmos or universe will be as different from this one as the seed is from the tree. So there's one wild thought that has always kind of excited me. I've thought about that for years.
This is okay. I'm gonna tell mine, and this is the difference between our brains. And I like yours. Yours is more adventurous. But for me, I remember I was walking into a grocery store on my way home from work to get something to make for our small group that was coming over that night. And I walk into the grocery store, and I remember thinking, when Jesus comes back, will there still be grocery stores? And I thought, my initial thought was like, that's so stupid. What a dumb question. Like, why is there going to be grocery stores? Of course, everything's perfect. Blah, blah, blah. And then but before I got to the produce, I was like, that's dumb that I would think that was dumb. Of course, there'd be grocery stores. Like, I'm not a farmer, or like, I'm not going to be on a farm and have animals that I'm going to slaughter and do, like, that doesn't feel like me. And I was like, but then I was like, what would a grocery store look like where it was quality food that I was giving in exchange for, and I felt good about giving this fair market money for, in return for food that somebody else got to labor for and produce and do that. It was just I was like, oh, of course there's grocery stores, but what does a redeemed grocery store look like? That's as far as I got. We're not talking about
on
like,
another planet.
hey.
No, you know what? Well, you actually bring up something really key, because people like you and I, who grew up in, evangelical traditions, which were highly dualistic. So we had this kind of default assumption that when you die, your soul goes to heaven or hell or whatever, right? That we had this idea that comes from Greek philosophy and such, that we have souls that go places after we die, something immaterial. And, you and I have both encountered Christian vision that really helped to break that down, that wasn't the biblical or Hebrew view of the cosmos, that there was no, what we think of as a soul, like something, a ghost kind of trapped inside our body, which is our real self. Somehow that wasn't from the Hebrew tradition. The Hebrew tradition and the New Testament tradition was that God would heal this world, that we belong in this world. We should have bodies. We always will. Jesus is resurrected and has a body, right?
So how does that fit with what you're saying? Like, that's where I feel like my question is going not in that that kind of Platonic dualistic thing you talked about, but in more of a Hebrew way of, oh, what will it look like when this world is restored? New creation is back, not back. This is the other, not back to creation, because it's not somebody had said this, David Fairchild used this, and I don't know where he got it, but it's not a repristinization. It's not, we're not trying to there was this pristine creation in Genesis 1 and 2, and we're trying to just get back to that. But it's always moving forward to get to where the creation was always supposed to go to. So, okay, now I just said, I don't agree with what you're saying, but now maybe I do. Is what you're saying, the filling everything and all that's where it was all intentionally supposed to be going? Is that how you're thinking? Yes. Or in some other way that's maybe more Buddhist or something?
No, that's how I'm thinking about it. Because, so this was kind of my story, was to keep it really simple. Believed in the straight up Greek philosophy stuff.
Your story is not simple, Brad. Your story is deep and profound, and it's beautiful, and we want to hear it.
All right. Thank you for that.
I can put my pastor therapist hat on.
Yeah. So I go from, I'm a teenager, kind of accepting the sort of Western Christian Greek synthesis, where it's like, we have souls, we die, we go to heaven or hell. Discovering,
unless the rapture comes first.
Right. But that's basically just taking that's a weird one. Then kind of coming to this new profound understanding that no, God's world is good, and that his plan is never, the Al Wolters quote, like, God doesn't make junk, or he doesn't junk what he made. I can't remember the exact quote. And I love that. That gave this whole new dignity to the world and everything we do in it. That it wasn't just about like the escaping off this sinking ship. It was all going to be the same. Like, when I was resurrected at the end of time, again, listen to us, right? I love it. But listen, you got to know how it comes across to people, I think. That I would be like, here in Hamilton. And it's only in recent years that I've started to kind of try and rediscover, how different it will be as well. Because I think there's some emphasis, it's like in the Reformed circles, where it's like, it will be exactly the same. And I'm like, well, I just don't, that doesn't seem to be the case. Like
So
Jesus,
you grew up, it was utterly different.
yeah, the next
Like
world was
the next
completely,
world was it was a different thing altogether, a different a different everything.
we were balls of
And
light.
then you learn this other, and maybe swing the pendulum the other to where, like, focusing on the consistency of it, that it's the same, it's consistent. And then in recent years, you've started to say, hey, is there ways that it's not, I'm not going back to a dualism, but the Bible's not really clear. It's like, it's not clear on exactly what does that mean? What does that look like?
Right.
So maybe is there ways that it expands, or it's not as similar, it's not as same as it is right now.
That's what I mean by the seed tree image.
Mm-hmm.
If the resurrected body is like a tree and the mortal body is like a seed, then they are very different. What I think was so encouraging when I discovered that God actually loved the world was the idea of being disembodied exist. Because when I was younger, I imagined people would talk about heaven, and I was like, you're stretching for images, right? And I really would just see like kind of light, balls of light. And I remember even being young and thinking like, that sounds terrible. Like that doesn't, even if you're feeling full of love and stuff, it sounds like completely unhuman. That's not our experience. Maybe there are beings out there that is their experience, but not humans, right? We belong in our body. We belong on earth. Anything else just feels terrifying and surreal. So it just made me think matter. It will not be, the new creation will not be different from the old in the sense that it won't be material. It will be matter. But that's why that image of filling space, emptiness with matter, to me is like, it's just an imagining, but I'm trying to like let it kind of grow and imagine if our universe right now is like a seed. What does tree universe look like? Or if our bodies right now are seeds, what does a forest body mean? You know? And I don't have, there's nothing we can rely. I mean, we have the post-resurrected Jesus, the couple stories of it, and it is just like some weird stuff, right? Like he's like walking through walls. He seems to have a different relationship with matter and with time and space. He seems to be able to be places like that. And, you know, and so it made me think there's a different,
which is interesting because I've never thought of it, but he didn't pull that. You don't see that trick before his resurrection.
Right. And you could say, oh, that's because he's God, but why? Why is that the answer? He has a resurrected body and it promises that we all will. So he seems to relate differently to the world, to time and space than he did before. But he still eats, but he can go through a wall, you know? I feel like anyone listening to this who's not familiar with the tradition is just like, what is going on? But it's like, it's cool stuff.
All right. What's your other rabbit hole you go down on time?
All right, here's another rabbit hole. This is kind of fun actually doing it like this. This is just wondering out loud freely. I have a sense that the whole universe will relate to time differently in the new creation, that there will be a new order, a new pattern of how things work. And I think the old order, or the one that we are currently in, is a cyclical order. It is the order of life and death, of birth and death, of the seasons, right? Winter, spring, summer, fall, or different seasons in Phoenix than
I was going to say, I don't know what these are here in Phoenix. Right.
But we live in a seasonal world, a transitory existence where stuff kind of grows and dies and becomes part of the soil again and grows back and dies, right? And I think in Christianity, or Western Christian circles, we've struggled with that because, you know, we talk about, well, any kind of death is a result of the fall. But yet there's also something about living in a transitory universe or world where things kind of grow and become part of the soil again that isn't necessarily just tragic, you know?
Doesn't feel evil, tragic.
It doesn't feel evil. Because I know when some people have talked about, oh, well, you know, how could, you know, people explore the whole evolution, creation stuff, and they're like, how could evolution be true because of death? But I'm like, what if we thought of it differently? Like, what if the human person was never supposed to die? I don't know, right? But this whole like how things become soil again is really like there is a beauty to it, even though there's also something about it that is tragic, right? So I've wondered, what if, you know, the Asian traditions that have really try to speak about the cycle of birth and death and rebirth and all that, right? What if there's something to that, but what they're recognizing is the pattern of the old order. And so that, because we can't deny that we
So
exist.
explain that a little more. And even going off of last week's episode, we were talking about sages. So what can we learn from some of these sages from the Asian traditions? Or how does
Well,
explain what you mean? Like how are they picking up on this?
Aspects of this pattern?
Yeah.
Well, because I think the Asian traditions have looked at reality and recognized that it seems to be in a cycle of some kind. I think they have seen that. And I think our modern scientific understanding has kind of tapped into that as well, like a different side of it. And, in Buddhism, the Buddha was working for a way to escape samsara, which was this cycle of death and rebirth, right? A mode to us, because he saw it as connected to suffering. So he developed this kind of method to escape samsara. And I think, if I'm not wrong, that's also in the Indian traditions, because that's what he was reacting to. Buddhism is basically like a reaction to Hinduism. It's kind of in some ways anti-Hinduism, not in a like political way, but in a religious way. It's like a reaction to it. So I don't fully know what I think about all that, because I believe that history is moving somewhere. Of course I do, but it's kind of like, it seems to me that the way our relationship with time works as people is that it's simultaneously like cyclical, and it ages, it moves forward, kind of like the life of a person. We live every day in day and night, the cycle of day and night, the same kind of things, right? But it moves forward. We age, we get older. And so I think that's kind of how I understand it. And I just wonder if in this new forest creation, seed forest, if time works differently and there is no more seasons. It's no longer the transitory order, but it is a new order of some kind of permanence, some kind of total present. I don't even know what that looks like, but I'm just wondering if, and I don't know, it makes me kind of take the way things are right now and see more beauty in it, but that it's kind of like, it isn't going to always be like this. There's going to be something different. But for now, we exist in the cycles. And I don't know. One of the meditations that we released for our Advent series, Daily Breadth Advent series, I kind of explored some of those ideas. And I do want to go down that rabbit hole more, because if we exist in cycles, and I think we know we exist in cycles even psychologically, right? Like when it comes to kind of self-improvement or working through issues, we know we get caught in these cycles of action and thought. And so a lot of psychology is about getting out of those cycles. So I wonder if there's just more there,
Dang. Okay, that just took me down a whole nother path. That the psychology, because we get trapped in scripts, and we go back even from our trauma. We go back to those scripts that we did in trauma, and it's breaking free of that enables you to move and be present now. Like you're not ever actually able to be present in the present, because you're going back into these cycles and scripts and narrating the things over. And to re-narrate that is to like break free and be able to be present now.
Right.
And what if that's part of what becomes a reality in the new creation or in the restored creation?
I know.
We're able to be fully present now, not going back on the traumatized scripts of the past.
And that's exactly what I'm wondering about. It's like, Revelation paints this picture where the new creation, God dwells with people. And we know that everything is present to God. Everything that has ever happened is in the moment to it. Like it all exists at the same time to God. There is no, I remember when I was young and they're like, God's beyond time. And I would be like, oh, okay, what in the world does that mean? Like people would say it like it was some kind of dogma. You had to just be like, well, God's beyond time, and that's the answer to it. But I always wondered, like, I don't know what that looks like. But I guess in like a C.S. Lewison image, it's more like an author writing a book. So they exist outside of the story that they're writing, even though we also have free will to kind of make our own choices, which is another whole thing, right? But yeah, what if there's something about this presentness? Because that stuff is so important to well-being. You know that, and so do I.
Mm-hmm.
Like, as an anxiety sufferer, learning how to return to the present moment, to remember like the things you can see, feel, taste, touch, hear, your breathing, it does work. It gives you it fills you with this kind of confident peace to return to this moment. And I actually I did a talk on that, on kind of how and I'd love to talk about this again at some point, but how when Jesus is on the hillside telling people not to worry, what he actually does is an exercise that returns them to the moment they're in by getting them to see the flowers and the ravens flying. That it's actually, interestingly, like a mindfulness type exercise. Because that's something to talk about. Whenever I read that passage growing up, I felt so condemned. Jesus being like, do not worry. And I was just like, oh, come on. Like, how do you just not worry?
Uh-huh.
And as someone with constant worrying problems, like, I couldn't just shut it off. And so I felt like there must be something wrong with me. And then I realized, after I kind of got into this whole mindfulness and present stuff, that, oh, when I read it again. And I think the people on that hillside came out of that experience feeling more connected to the moment they were in.
Huh.
And actually felt less anxious.
He wasn't trying to give them, here's a prescription on something to do or to go do it. But he's actually right now either, hey, look at the lilies of the field right over there and look at the birds in the air. Like, or he's saying, and to put it in, like, close your eyes, consider, think about, and it actually draws them into the
Right. Because I was always like, he's like, I always imagined it, because you do this without thinking. It's kind of the tone of scripture that isn't always accurate. And I always imagine him saying it in kind of an angry voice, where it's like, don't worry. Do you think the lilies worry? Do you think the ravens worry? Like, they know God provides for them, so why can't you?
Why are you such an idiot that you're going to be out here worrying about everything?
And then I'm like, that tone is definitely not the tone of Jesus. Nothing, that's not how he comes across. So what if it was different? And then I started to hear him saying, like, you don't have to, you can, and helping them through this exercise. They actually felt comforted.
That's really interesting. Well, I wonder, to wrap this up, or I wonder, as we're going through Advent and thinking about time and thinking about this eternal presence and being present, I wonder if Advent, which is so much obviously about time and longing and preparation, and not to get away from the longing and the future aspect of that, but also does it in some way, because we sit between these two, the first and second coming, we sit there, and where it's going is we'll be able to be fully present. Is there something in Advent for us for the next few weeks to just to really be present? Like, it's a breakaway. It's the start of a new church calendar year. It's a start of something new, and say, how do we be present now in the midst of the waiting, in the midst of,
That's a brilliant question. Like, in the waiting, we're connecting with Israelites and the waiting that was going on in the late antiquity. We have our own waiting and longing. And I think we sometimes forget, it's like very painful. There's anger and rage building. Like, there's desperation. For, maybe in like the more affluent church, Advent can be this really like kind of calming, beautiful time. But what happens in places where like life is ripped apart by war? Like, it's actually there's a desperation to God fixing things, to Christ returning. And I don't think I've ever felt that in that way. Like, I have felt it, but never to that extent, right? But it gives me this question, like, what does it mean? Kind of just what you're saying. What does it mean to practice being present in this period of tension and waiting and longing and even desperation, right? Because I don't think it has to mean feeling emotionally like on edge all the time. I don't think that that's the vision.
Well, man, this is fun. We should do this again another time.
Yeah, this was a weird one, and I think we should keep it weird.
Let's keep it weird.
We actually can't use that slogan. There's a TV channel here in Canada called YTV. It was the kids' TV channel, and that was their slogan: "Keep it weird."
We
It's
don't
a
want to.
great slogan, but I
We
don't
don't want
want
to mess
to.
with any copyrights.
We don't upset YTV, big YTV.
We don't want. We don't want freestyle theology getting sued.
No, we don't.
No cease and desist. All
Especially-
our fan base would be really upset if they weren't getting these weekly. I mean, we got a lot of emails and DMs from not doing one over Thanksgiving week. We apologize to all our fans who wrote, and we're trying to do better, but we are committed to every week posting these. So all the hundreds and even thousands of emails and DMs and phone calls that we got, we hope we replied to all of them, and we will do better at getting these out every week for you guys.
We're going to release a statement just to all our sponsors and stuff like that.
Yeah.
We're sorry.
And sorry to YTV.
Of course.
All right, man. You want to do this again?
I do. I'm feeling next week.
Let's do it.
Freestyle Theology is sponsored by Daily Breath, the Christian meditation app that really works. Learn more at dailybreadth.app. That's daily, BREADTH.app. Or try it for free by downloading it in the Apple App Store or on Google Play.